Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-respected professional and an entrepreneur from Virginia, USA, Ashish Gupta. Ashish, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you. Ashish is the Chief Executive Officer of ScaleUpExec. So, Ashish, my first question, you had a diverse journey from building a wireless company to working at Apple to reviving a distressed e-commerce business. What common thread connects all these experiences?
Uh, that's a good question. I think common thread is that despite what you do in the world, like here
Hmm,
in these cases, whether it's through business,
hmm,
that there's so much self-learning that comes through all of this.
hmm,
And I think being an entrepreneur is probably one of the most impactful ways of developing your own connection
hmm,
inwards, your own resilience,
hmm,
perseverance,
hmm.
and ability to handle difficult situations and challenges. So I think being an entrepreneur is one of the most beneficial paths, at least from what I can see, to
Hmm.
really grow and evolve yourself as a human.
Okay. And what inspired you to move from big roles at Apple and Qualcomm to working hands-on with smaller businesses as a fractional chief operating officer?
Yeah, that's actually a really also another really good question. It was interesting when I was at Apple. I was there about 5 years. In
Hmm,
my last year or two, I realized that my learning had plateaued.
hmm,
And whenever learning starts plateauing, I feel like there's a part of the human nature that doesn't get to get utilized. And
hmm.
that part of human nature maybe connects to my first point, which is around evolution and growth. And I feel like as humans, we should always be growing, evolving, and improving ourselves, making ourselves better versions than we were in the past.
Wow.
And I realized that at Apple at some point that my learning had plateaued and my growth and internal journey had plateaued. And so
Hmm,
that's when I started looking for what should be the next path. What should I do otherwise?
hmm,
And it was actually interesting when I was about 3 or 4 years into Apple, uh, my manager, the big boss at in our department, she came to me and said, "Okay, here's what your next 5 years looks like." And
hmm.
for most people, that would be a very like a aspirational next 5 years.
Hmm.
It was something that most people probably would have gotten very excited about. But as soon as I heard that, I lost all motivation
Hmm.
to be at Apple because there's some adventure in life that should be
Yeah.
needed, some
Yeah.
uncertainty, unknowns that should be needed. And so
Hmm.
that's when, that was also combined with the plateauing and learning at that time
Hmm.
period. So that's when I started to
Fascinating.
see should I get back into an entrepreneurial journey.
Fascinating. And from a professional to being an entrepreneur, and I was fascinated that you're also exploring spirituality. So,
Yeah.
how has your exploration of practical spirituality influenced your leadership style and decision making? And tell me a little bit more about the spirituality that you're exploring.
Yeah, I think it's very much hand in hand. It almost feels like entrepreneurship and business and spirituality, whether you realize it or not, are very deeply connected, and one helps you with the other. And one is a deep subset of the other. So I feel like through the 25 years or so that I've worked through different entrepreneurial and corporate paths, there've been so many challenges, especially when you're an entrepreneur, that
Mm,
there's nobody else.
mm.
There's nobody else to support you in the end.
Yep,
Eventually, you have to be able to rely on yourself,
correct.
and you'll be facing so many challenges that probably most people uh, may not face in their regular life,
Mm,
and you have to figure out how to deal with it.
yeah.
So that could be issues with people, challenging people in your team. It could
Mm,
be issues with growing your business.
mm,
It could be issues in the financial side.
mm,
It could be all kinds of different things.
mm,
And so spirituality really has helped me trying to, instead of relying on external factors for to gain my stability, to
mm,
instead relying on internal factors to gain stability. So it
mm,
doesn't matter what's happening in the outside world or in your business or
mm.
in your personal life, that you can instead focus and tune inwards and gain some stability that way. It's almost like there's two worlds that exist. There's
Yeah,
an external world and there's an internal world. And if we
correct.
can pitch our stability on our internal world, then it can help you go through all the ups and downs of life and business and relationships.
Amazing. Thank you. Great response. Let's now talk about Scale Up Exec. Tell me about Scale Up Exec and what makes it different from a traditional consulting firm or a full-time COO hire.
Yeah. Firstly, before I started Scale Up Exec, I've had in the past in my businesses different business coaches and advisors, board of directors. So
Mm,
I've had a lot of people that have helped guide and coach me. But I
mm,
realized pretty much most of the time when I met them, my to-do list would just get longer. So
mm.
they'd give me a bunch of interesting ideas, but then that basically fell back onto me to help execute all of that.
Yeah.
And either I didn't have the time to do everything that they would suggest, or I may not have had the skills or deep expertise in that area
Mm,
to do it well. And that's when I realized that, okay, just an advisor or a coach can get you so far, but then there's a lot of help needed from strategy to implementation, to actually
mm,
executing on all those things.
mm,
And
mm,
that's where I think, firstly, a COO is quite different than an advisor or coach, where this is somebody who not only can help with strategy, but they can roll up their sleeves and
mm,
actually execute.
mm.
So my team is very focused on execution, making things happen. Secondly, fractional versus full-time. We're mainly playing in the small, medium-sized business space. So that means businesses between maybe 1 million in revenue per year up to like 50 or 60 million in revenue per year.
Mm.
So in that kind of range, uh, it's often not possible to afford a full-timer that is
Yeah.
really high quality and top tier.
Mm,
Uh, and also conversely, a COO who has deep experience and has time and again scaled out and built up businesses and gotten them to successful exits, they may not be that interested in working in a 1 to 50 million a year revenue
right.
business. They could easily get a role in with high compensation in a larger enterprise.
Mm,
And so on both ends of the spectrum, it's very hard, especially for traditional businesses. Let's say you're a construction business or you're medical practice or a law firm.
mm,
Uh, Many of top tier talent may not be that interested in coming to work for you. If you're a tech firm, tech is a bit more sexy, so it's a bit more possible, even if
mm,
you're a low revenue, to get access to top tier talent. But in traditional industries, it's very tough. So I wanted
mm,
to change that, and that's where we now play, where I have access to my team is really the top tier, the folks that have time and again scaled businesses from 0 to 8, 9 figures, gotten them to exits, and so they have that on the ground, hands-on
mm,
experience with scaling businesses. And now when we work fractionally, meaning we work for 3 or 4 different businesses at the same time, it all
mm.
kind of works out and we're able to make it happen. So now
And
small
and why
businesses,
did you decide to work exclusively with experienced chief operating officers? And how does
yeah,
that shape your value proposition?
yeah, it's actually an interesting point. When you're working fractionally, that means 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day in a business,
Mm,
versus if you're working full time, meaning you have like 10 hours or whatever in a day. In that 1 or 2 hours that you're working fractionally, you have to be able to move the needle very fast
mm,
and in a significant way for a business. So that means you have to have lots of experience. If you have a breadth and depth of experience, now in that 1 hour that you bring into a business that you're working in
mm,
fractionally, the type of impact you can make is disproportionate versus somebody who has average amount of experience or
mm,
typical skill set, what they can bring even in a 10 hour a day. So fractionally, you have to be able to be more
mm.
deeply experienced in order to make that hour
Very
worthwhile
interesting.
for,
Very, very
yeah.
interesting. And Ashish, what are some of the common signs that a company is ready for a fractional COO?
Yeah, one of the signs, which is a bit of a general sign, is that let's say a CEO or founder knows what their goals are. They know what they eventually want to get to.
Mm,
And then when they look at the current state of their business, and there whatever gaps exist between the current state and the future state, if they have a clear idea on how to get to the
mm,
future state, they know what paths to take, and they have complete confidence in getting there, then you don't need a COO.
mm,
But if you feel like you either don't have the skills or you're not quite sure what path to take to
mm,
get you to your end goals from where you are currently, then it's relevant to get somebody who's really top tier to come there
mm,
and be by your side to help guide and navigate and execute.
Fascinating. What are some of the most common operational bottlenecks you have observed across the several businesses you've helped?
Yeah. I think one of the most common is it actually comes back down to the CEO and the founder. So, for example, most CEOs or founders, just because they hear this in the marketplace, they feel like they have to grow their business. But if they look deep down inside, they may not actually be that interested in scaling their business. Maybe they
Mm,
want a stable business
mm,
that generates enough cash flow to sustain their lifestyle.
mm.
That's totally okay if that's what they truly want.
Yeah.
If they deeply want scaling, that requires a whole different amount of investment in terms of your
Mm,
personal time and effort and energy and mental space, and of
mm,
course, finances. So I think one of the biggest bottlenecks is a founder not really knowing what they want.
mm.
And once they clarify that, then everything else can fall into place.
Amazing. You also emphasize aligning strategy, execution, and purpose. How do you begin this alignment process in a new client engagement?
Yeah, so it always again starts with what is it truly that a founder or CEO wants. So
Mm,
when we dive deep into a new engagement, that's what we really try and unravel and unpack from conversations and specific focus questions to the CEO or founder to really uncover what it is that they want. Many
mm,
people say, "Oh, I just want to grow my business." But where do you want to grow? Will you be satisfied if right now it's 5 million a year and it gets to 6 million a year? Will you be
mm,
satisfied? If it gets to 10 million a year, will you be satisfied? At what point will you be satisfied and content?
mm,
And so once we understand that, next step is to figure out what are the skills and motivational factors that that CEO has. Like, for example, if that CEO is really good at strategy and vision,
mm,
but they're not that good at execution. Or let's say they're really strong uh, in understanding where they want to eventually get to, but leadership and management is not their skill set. So we're
mm,
going to now dive deep into all these gaps to understand what are the real strengths of that CEO or founder, and what are
mm,
the gaps, the things that are missing that are
mm,
needed to be
mm,
filled in order to get to the goals.
mm,
And then we start filling in those gaps.
Amazing. What misconceptions do founders or CEOs usually have about hiring a fractional COO?
Yeah, one is that they often might feel that a fractional COO is not really going to be embedded in their culture or their
Mm,
team. So
mm,
they're going to feel like they're going to think that it's not the same as having somebody who's sitting here in-house from morning to evening. But we've actually designed some really interesting mechanisms in our business so that for every engagement, they should never feel like we're an external party, and they should never feel like we're not there when they need us. So
mm,
we come in every day. So even if we're working fractionally, we're there every day in every engagement.
mm,
And even outside of bulk hours that we end up working, we're also available for communication throughout the day. So we've kind of got interesting mechanisms to make sure that every team feels like we're deeply embedded in the
mm,
culture and we're as equally vested in the success of that business. So I think
mm,
that's one of the most common uh, objections that I often hear before an engagement starts.
mm. The other thing that I was wondering when I was reading about you was, how do you integrate with an existing leadership team? Everyone talks about how important it is for the teams to be able to play together and run together and do lots of things together. And here comes a fractional COO who's now bringing in a very different skill set. How do your colleagues integrate without disrupting established dynamics?
Yeah. So firstly, it's important to understand what context you're getting into. So
Mm,
for example, several of our engagements, maybe 30-40% of our engagements are deep turnaround situations. Like there may be businesses that in the past used to do well. Now their revenues are declining, maybe because of competitive pressure or the industry landscape has changed. And so in those cases, the type of integration that's useful and needed
mm,
might be quite different than a business that's already on a strong trajectory and now needs help to clean up things to get to the next level. So,
mm,
for example, in a turnaround situation, there actually might be a lot of upskilling needed in the leadership team. There also might be a lot of changes needed in the leadership team
mm,
from the actual constituents in that team. And so the type of impact that you can make might be dependent on how much of a change you can bring to
mm,
that team.
mm,
Versus, let's say there's a team that's already doing well and now they need to tighten up their loose ends. In that case, we're going to really try and understand what is the current culture
mm,
and how do people work best? what are their motivational factors, and then now how do we integrate so we don't change or upset, but instead help bring people together to get to the next level.
Mm, well said. You just spoke of culture, and even for the earlier question, you talked about culture. I'd love to understand, how do you approach culture building when a company has been stuck or demoralized, especially when you said in a turnaround situation for some time?
Yep. So culture, it's first important to understand what is the current culture.
Yeah.
And by culture, I mean a couple of things. One is I like to define culture as when me as a leader or manager is not in a meeting, and I know my other team members are in that meeting.
Mm,
Even if I'm not there, I know how the team members are going to think, act, and make decisions.
mm,
That's when I know that a culture is really strong.
mm,
And so I define a culture by what's called behaviors and values. So
mm,
values meaning, let's say I have a value around teamwork, then I'm going to define that what does teamwork mean in terms of how people will actually exhibit that through behaviors. So
mm,
an example might be for teamwork that uh, when I am when I observe that a team member of mine is working on something that I have knowledge or skill in, without them asking, I'm going to come and offer my support and assistance to make sure that they're successful.
mm,
So I like to define values and then behaviors that are associated with those values.
mm,
So it's important to understand what the current set of values and behaviors are, if they exist.
mm,
And if not, then now we're trying to find, based on what our goals are, what the CEO or founder eventually wants to get to,
mm,
what kind of culture or set of values and behaviors are going to be helpful to
mm,
help us get there.
mm,
And then now I work backwards and see, after defining those values and behaviors, how do I spread them throughout the whole organization, throughout the leadership team and individual contributors, and
mm,
bring them into my daily operations?
mm. And what are some practical steps you use to help leaders to become more resilient and clear-headed under pressure?
Yeah. So first is always understanding that, and I've seen this time and again in my own personal experience, that doesn't matter what challenges come up
Mm,
for you. It doesn't matter how difficult they seem, there's always a path. There's always a solution.
mm,
And I myself have been through crazy ups and crazy downs, and I've seen at every juncture, there's always been, even though at that time it might feel like I'm completely stuck, there's
mm,
always been eventually a path that shows up, and I'm
mm.
able to find a way to get out.
Yeah.
So I think first is understanding that there is going to be a way to get out of this.
Mm. Time for three more questions for you, Ashish. How do you nurture a sense of ownership and accountability in teams during rapid transformation?
Hmm. First is understanding each team member's motivational factors.
Mm,
So there are different things that motivate different people, and that can also be how their manager interacts with them.
mm,
So some people are really motivated by a manager who's closely involved in their work and deeply guides and helps and coaches. Other people are much more motivated by having a manager that is more hands off, maybe gives the eventual direction of where they want or the North Star where they want you to go, and
mm,
then they're hands off. So it's important to understand for each of your team members, instead of taking a blanket one size fits all approach, understand what are the motivational factors for each team member. And then now you customize and tailor your management style to each of those individuals to what helps motivate them the best.
mm,
And I've seen time and again that if you do that, if you customize your approach,
mm,
your management style to each team member, now you'll be able to get the best out of them, regardless if it's a scaling situation in the business or a stability situation in the business. But either way, you're going to get the most out of them because they'll feel motivated and they'll feel like they're in an environment that really caters to them and supports them.
mm. Amazing. You often deal with messy problems. What's been the messiest challenge you've helped a business navigate? And no names, of course.
There's actually one business that's kind of an interesting tail end of the life cycle of working with us. We're actually working ourselves out of a job here.
Hmm.
But when we joined the business, it's around a 20 million a year construction business.
Mm,
And before we joined, they had a COO full-time in place. They were losing 350K a month for the prior 18 months before we joined. They
hmm.
were in the last legs, so they were considering getting into a bankruptcy path. And we joined them fractionally on a 1 hour a day plan. Within 3 weeks, we were able the CEO saw the type of value and impact we were bringing. they changed they it wasn't our intent, but they replaced their full-time COO with us working fractionally
Mm.
on 3 hours a day. And in 3 hours a day, within 3 months, we got them to net zero. In month four, we got them to profitability. And then now in month 14, we're getting them to the tail end of a successful exit. So this was a very deep turnaround situation where they were really on
Amazing.
the brink. And it feels quite empowering when you're able
Yeah,
to help a set like 100 people keep their jobs, and you're
absolutely.
able to help a team get back on track.
Fascinating. Thank you. And my last question for you, Ashish. What lessons from practical spirituality do you find applicable to high stakes business decisions?
Mm. So I think first is ability to control our reactions.
Mm.
It's very, especially in high stake situations, emotions can be elevated. That's
Mm.
natural.
Yeah.
And because of emotions being elevated,
Mm.
our reactions can also be elevated. So
Mm.
we might not be able to make decisions from a place of stability and grounding. We might be making decisions more from emotions and reactions. And I
Mm.
often find that emotions actually play a very minimal role in the positive sense in
Mm.
business and in high
Mm.
stake situations. So if you are in a high stake situation, first, don't rush in making a decision.
Mm.
First, try and ground yourself, uh, come back into your inner world
Mm.
and gain some stability there. Once you feel like you're in a stable place, then go ahead and act
Mm.
and make decisions. So I think that's one of the most important things is always make decisions from a stable place.
What a great response. Always take decisions from a stable place. And on that note, Ashish, thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. I think our conversation on Scale Up Exec really showcased there are so many different kind of skill sets that organizations need that you seem to be bringing through your COOs to help not just transform or uh, pull out of trouble, but also build and exit from businesses. Thank you again for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.